I want you to imagine this with me, because it is the only way I can describe how it felt. The moment when you realize you have been erased from the one day you thought you would never be forgotten. My son got married, and I was not there. Not because I was too far away, not because I was late, not because of a quarrel that kept us apart. I was not there because no invitation was ever given. No seat was ever saved. No thought of me was ever considered. The wedding happened without me, and the only evidence I had was a photo where my face was absent, where my name might as well never have existed. That morning I woke up light, almost humming, as if the day had promised me something. I brewed my coffee, and as I held the cup in my hands I thought, today is the day I will ask him about the wedding. I will hear the joy in his voice, and I will feel my heart swell, and I will prepare myself for the most important day in his life. I walked to the phone, dialed the number, and when he answered, I felt the air in the room shift. I was ready to hear happiness in his words. I was ready to hear him say, "Mama, we set the date." I was ready to hear him laugh as he asked me to help with the details. But before he could speak, her voice came through. Calm, steady, and sharp, the kind of voice that hides a knife in a smile. She said, "We already got married yesterday." It was small. We only invited special people. Special people. 4 words that took the floor from under me. 4 words that knocked the breath out of my lungs. I stood there in my own living room holding the phone like it was made of iron, my body heavy, my chest hollow. My son sat just across from me on the sofa I had bought for them with my pension money. He would not meet my eyes. His gaze sank to the floor, his hands rubbed together, and silence poured out of him. He did not say, "Mama, that is not what she meant." He did not say, "Mama, of course you are special." He said nothing at all. And she leaned back against the cushions I had chosen, crossed her legs, and smiled at me. It was not the smile of someone who feels joy. It was the smile of someone who knows she has won. Upstairs in my closet hung the pale blue dress I had bought months before. I remember the store, the way I wandered through the racks, my fingers brushing across fabrics, searching for something that carried dignity, something that said proud but not proud in a loud way. My eyes stopped on that dress, and I knew it was the one. I pulled it down and held it against myself in the mirror. It shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light, a softness in its folds, a quiet beauty. I wanted to look like a mother who had done something right. The tag said $200, and my chest tightened. $200 could cover their groceries. $200 could pay part of their rent. $200 could go toward their endless list of needs. But I bought it anyway, for me, for that day, for that photograph I thought I would stand in. I brought it home and hung it carefully, away from dust, away from light, as if it were a treasure. I found shoes, ivory with little straps, shoes that pinched when I tried them on, but that made me smile anyway. Beauty has always pinched a little, I told myself. I polished the earrings I had saved, little drops of gold that caught the light when I turned my head. I imagined the way they would sparkle as I smiled through tears at the ceremony. I had already set aside $1,000 as a gift. I wanted to press it into his hand and say, "Use this for your home, for your future, for the life you are beginning." I wanted him to feel supported, the way I had always tried to support him. I wanted him to know I was proud. I scrubbed my house until my back ached, polished the silver, cleaned the windows, because I thought perhaps they would stop by after the ceremony. I wanted my home to shine for them. I called my sister Diana in Chicago and told her the wedding would be soon, told her I was ready, told her I could not wait. And then I stood in my own house and was told the wedding had already happened and that only special people were invited. That night, I opened the closet and touched the dress. My fingers shook as they ran across the fabric. It no longer looked like hope. It looked like humiliation sewn into seams. It looked like foolishness dyed pale blue. The shoes sat unopened, the earrings lay in their dish, waiting to sparkle for no one. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at it until my eyes blurred. I thought of the photographs I had dreamed of standing in, and then I thought of the photographs I saw instead. Her family, her parents, her siblings, all standing around them, glasses raised, smiles wide, as if they had built this life with their hands. The lace on her dress gleamed, the flowers shone in the background. Every face was there but mine. I scrolled through those pictures until my stomach twisted, until my chest ached, until I felt my breath catch. I told myself to stop, but I did not stop. I pressed on the bruise because I needed to know it was real. I laid down that night but did not sleep. The moonlight fell across the room, white and indifferent, and I stared at the ceiling. My mind ran back through every memory of showing up, every time I had been there. The time he stood on the stage at school in a paper crown and scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine. The time he fell from his bicycle and looked at me, his lip trembling, and I picked him up and said, "Pain is not shame." The nights I sat by his bed counting breaths when fever gripped him. The afternoons I carried groceries heavier than my body wanted so that he would not go hungry. I showed up again and again without hesitation. And on the one day I thought he would want me most, I was erased. 7 days went by. 7 days where silence hung over me like fog. 7 days where I walked through my house like it belonged to someone else. 7 days where every object whispered the same betrayal. The refrigerator I filled, the sofa I bought, the little decorations I had given them when she admired them. 7 days where my dress hung in the closet like a ghost. 7 days where the phone did not ring with apology. 7 days where the echo of her words, "only special people," rang louder than any apology could. On the 7th day, the phone rang, and her voice slid into the room like a draft through a crack you forgot to seal. She did not sound proud then. She did not sound calm, or certain, or victorious. She sounded desperate, the way people do when the world they arranged on your back begins to tilt without warning. She said the landlord was threatening eviction, said the rent was overdue, said I must have forgotten to send the money. That word, forgotten, made me press the phone tighter to my ear, not because I could not hear, but because I needed to steady myself against the lie of it. I had not forgotten a single month. I had remembered every transfer the way a mother remembers doses of medicine when a fever runs high. I remembered the first month like a promise, the second month like a duty, the third month like an ache, and the months after that like a trap that looks like kindness from the outside. I told her, very softly, that I only help special people. The sentence surprised me with how steady it stood on the floor between us. She was quiet long enough for me to hear my own breath moving in and out, thin and steady, and then she tried to pour sugar into the space, tried to call me a second mother, tried to remind me that they counted on me. Those words used to work. They used to tap on the softest part of me until I opened up and poured myself out. But my chest felt different now. The place that used to open had learned how to close. When I hung up, I did not pace, I did not wring my hands, I did not call a friend to ask what to do. I went to the drawer where I keep the thick envelopes of my life, the old checkbook with its familiar scratches of ink and arithmetic in margins, the bank statements folded along the same creases month after month, the stack of receipts I save because there is a kind of dignity in writing down what you paid and why. I laid them out in a neat line across the table as if I were opening a window. If a woman cannot trust how she feels, she can often trust what the numbers say. I added slowly, even though I already knew the sum by the heaviness it made in my ribs. Rent, $500 a month, 36 months, $18,000. Groceries, $200 a month, another $7,200. Gifts, the kind that pretend to be small but accumulate like dust along a windowsill, $3,000. Emergencies, which I learned are often just other people's ordinary life, $800. A car loan that went out and did not come back, $2,500. Furniture and repairs that were supposed to be temporary, $1,900. $33,400. I wrote the number once, then again, Because repetition turns disbelief into reality you can hold without shaking. I said it out loud in an empty kitchen. 33,400. The syllables felt like stones, blunt and honest. I stared at the number until the room turned quiet in a different way. The way a house goes quiet when a storm has finally passed and the roof is still on. I thought of Robert, my late husband, and the night he made me promise that our savings would become a life, not a leash. He told me to see the ocean in places where it turns from blue to grey, to order the dessert if the dessert looked like a small celebration, to buy a coat and not apologise for the warmth inside it, to take a class because learning is another word for breathing. He said live, not just survive. He said it plainly, not as poetry, but the words have been echoing ever since. I used that money to keep other people comfortable while I disappeared in plain sight. I used it to survive long enough to realise I had not lived in years. When morning came, I dressed without the rush that used to live in my hands and walked to the bank. The manager recognised me, the way people recognise regular tides. He asked if I needed another transfer set up, and I surprised us both by saying no. I told him to cancel every automatic payment to block any access that did not belong to my name. He asked if I was sure, if anyone was pressuring me, and I told him the truth. I am sure, and the pressure has always been mine. He printed out papers that said in small type what my mouth had finally said in a strong voice. I signed, and the pen did not shake. Outside, the air felt wider. The same street I've walked for years had a different shape, as if someone had swept a film off the surface of things. My steps sounded like they belonged to me. I passed the bakery with its early trays of bread, and the park where mothers push strollers with coffee cups tucked in the basket below. And I wondered how many times those women will confuse exhaustion with love before someone tells them they can set the cup down and sit for a minute. I remembered a bench on the far side of the park where I used to sit while my boy chased pigeons and shouted, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." He always knew I was looking. There was a time when my gaze mattered more than any stranger's approval. I turned that memory over like a coin and held it until the heat of my palm warmed it, and then I let it go. Nostalgia is a soft thief when you're trying to climb out of a deep place. On my way back, I saw the 3 cars in front of my house from half a block away. I knew 2 of them the way you know the shape of a person's shadow under a streetlight. The third was unfamiliar, rented or borrowed or brought along like an argument in a briefcase. My first instinct was to stop, to calculate the safest way to walk into my own life. I have learned to notice my instincts, to ask whether they come from fear or from wisdom. This one belonged to both. I kept walking but slowed enough to feel the key in my hand and the ground under my shoes. The lock turned, and I stepped inside. My son was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands. His wife paced a short path between the living room and the dining room like someone measuring a lawn with the same 12 inches over and over. A man in a grey suit sat at the table I used to write letters and pay bills and roll out pie dough on Thanksgiving. My papers were spread before him like a map. He did not ask to touch them. He simply had them. I have seen strangers touch precious things gently, and people who claim to love you handle what is yours as if it were already theirs. He was the second kind. "What is this?" I asked, and the question landed with more authority than I expected. She rushed toward me with a kind of practiced urgency, naming the grey suit as a helper, naming worry as the reason for the invasion, naming me as the person in need of saving. Worry without permission is control in a borrowed coat. She said there had been concerns about my memory, about my judgment. She said they just wanted to ease the burden, just wanted to take care of things until I felt better. The grey suit slid a folder toward me, and I saw the words, power of attorney, temporary, until further notice, best interest. Beneath those words, the true sentence, sign here if you agree to hand over your life. I picked up the folder and put it in the trash. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I said, leave. My son's head snapped up. He said I was being different. He said I would regret it. He said I would end up alone and that no one would be there when I needed help. I said the thing that had been sitting in my mouth for months, waiting for a day brave enough to let it out. I said I've been alone for years, and the only difference now is that the aloneness will be mine. He did not look at my face then. He looked at the walls, the floor, anywhere but the eyes of the woman who taught him to hold eye contact when telling the truth. They left with promised consequences slipping behind them like the tail of a storm. The house, after, was quiet in the way a church feels quiet on a weekday. I stood in the doorway where the grey suit had sat and thought about what a life is when it is written down by someone who does not intend to honour it. Then I called a lawyer of my own. His name was Mr. Harris, and his voice had the kind of patience that makes you tell the whole story, not just the polite version. I told him about the wedding that happened without me. I told him about the $33,400. I told him about the folder in the trash and the promise on the porch that my future would be emptiness if I did not sign. He did not gasp or rush to blame me for believing people I loved. He said this is more common than anyone wants to admit. He said it is called elder financial abuse. He said naming a thing does not fix it, but it gives you something to push against. He told me to change the locks. He told me to install a camera. He told me to open a new account at a new bank where my name would be the only name and where the face behind the counter would not already know my story. I did all three before dusk. When I closed the door after the locksmith, I leaned my back against the wood and felt something inside me line up with the frame. I had thought safety was a door that would swing open if someone I loved knocked. I had to relearn that safety is a door that answers to my hand first. That evening, there was a knock that sounded like concern rather than demand. My neighbour stood with a ceramic mug that warmed my fingers even through the handle. She said she heard voices the day before and a thud that sounded like a decision, and she wanted to be sure I was all right. I told her the truth, which is different from telling the whole story. I said I had stopped paying for other people to stand on my neck. She did not ask for details, and she did not have to. She said her daughter had once called love the same thing I had called duty, and that she had untangled herself and it nearly broke her and it absolutely saved her. She said silence is a harsh teacher for a while, and then a gentle one. She said I will be here if the silence gets too loud. When she left, I stood at the window with the mug cooling in my hands and watched my own reflection in the glass until it looked like someone I recognized. For 2 days, the phone was quiet. On the third, a different sound arrived, not a ring, but the slap of paper against wood. A petition. A request for a court to declare me incompetent to manage my own life. I read it slowly because I have learned that heartbreak hides in clauses and small print. They said I was forgetful. They said my decisions had changed. They said I had become isolated, influenced by strangers, separated from the people who knew me best. They described a woman I did not recognize, and then they named her mine. I called Mr. Harris, and his calm did not waver. He told me to breathe, and then he told me what to gather. Dates and amounts and messages that used the language of love like a key to a safe. He scheduled a cognitive evaluation with a doctor who would look me in the face and see me, rather than see an idea of me that served someone else's argument. I kept notes. I printed records. I arranged them in a folder that felt heavier than its paper should allow, not because of weight, but because documents mean something when your voice has been treated like rumour. The week before the evaluation, I walked to the park and sat on the bench where I used to unpack sandwiches from a brown bag for a little boy with a big appetite. I remembered slipping the crust from bread and passing the softer pieces to a mouth that did not like edges. I remembered saying, "Finish your carrots, and then finish your apple, and then run again because your legs were built for it." I remembered his hand finding mine at the crosswalk and how trust once fit between our palms. I did not cry there on the bench. I did the math again in my head and then subtracted something that mattered more than money, and when I reached 0, I stood and walked home. The evaluation room smelled faintly of disinfectant and something floral from a plug-in on the far wall. The doctor asked me to remember words and repeat them later. She asked me to draw shapes and rotate numbers in my mind. She asked me to tell her what I would do if I found a stamped envelope on the sidewalk. I told her I would pick it up, check the address, and drop it in the nearest mailbox because a thing meant to arrive deserves to arrive. She smiled at that without writing it down. When we finished, she set down her pen and said clearly that my cognition was intact, my memory sound, my reasoning unbroken. I thanked her the way a person thanks a stranger who tells them what they already know, but needed to hear out loud so the next person will listen. On the walk home, I passed a store window where a dress hung in a colour somewhere between grey and blue, like evening when the day refuses to say it is over. It was not my dress, not the one I keep in my closet as a lesson. But I stopped and looked anyway, because I was learning that looking at something beautiful did not obligate me to buy it, did not obligate me to make it a symbol. Sometimes beauty is just a pause on the sidewalk. Sometimes pausing is an act of power when your life has been a run for too long. Back at my table, I opened the folder and placed the evaluation on top of the stack like the first strong stone in a wall. I sharpened a pencil. I wrote the number 33,400 again at the center of a clean page and drew a box around it. I listed beneath it everything that could not be measured, nights with a phone against my ear while other people cried about bills I could not control, mornings when I ate lightly because money had already left my account before breakfast, afternoons when I left a store without what I needed because someone had texted a request disguised as an emergency. Then I drew another box, larger, around the whole page. When I was a child, I used to draw boxes around boxes until the paper filled with frames, each one standing for a boundary I did not yet know how to set. I looked at the page and thought, this is what it means to learn late and to learn anyway. That night I slept through until morning, and when I woke up the house did not feel like a warning. It felt like a place a woman might live who has decided that the weight of what she gave will not be the measure of who she is. The morning after the evaluation, I woke with a kind of clarity that made the sunlight look sharper through the blinds. For years I had rolled out of bed with a list of what needed to be done for them. What bill to cover, what groceries to buy, what promise to keep so that they would not fall behind. My life had become a calendar marked with other people's needs. But that morning, for the first time in longer than I could measure, I woke without that weight. I sat on the edge of the bed and said out loud, softly, I belong to myself. The words startled me. They sounded like a prayer I did not know I had memorized. I moved through my house slower than usual, not because my body was weak, but because I wanted to feel each object without rushing. The mug I always filled with coffee belonged to my hand again. The chair at the table belonged to my back. Even the walls seemed to listen to me differently, as if they had been waiting for me to speak my own name. I poured my coffee and thought of the phone call that had begun my turning point. Her voice trembling, saying the rent was due, saying I must have forgotten. And my voice, steady for once, answering, I only help special people. The words tasted stronger now, not just a sentence but a vow. That day was the day I stopped being the woman they depended on and started being the woman I needed to be. It was not easy. Saying no never is when you have built your life on yes. I heard the echoes of my own history scolding me, reminding me that good mothers sacrifice, that love is proven by how much you give. I remembered the way my son looked when he was small, standing in the kitchen with his hand out, asking for another cookie, and the way I always relented. I remembered his teenage years when he pushed boundaries, when I said no, and then softened because I wanted him to feel loved, wanted him to feel safe, wanted him to see me as the mother who would never fail him. All those memories crowded around me, pressing me to pick up the phone, to apologize, to offer money again as if money were the glue that could mend the tear. But I did not pick up the phone. I sat there in the quiet and listened to the voice inside me that said, "You are done disappearing." The calls came in waves. First her number, then his, then numbers I did not recognize, but I knew who they were. I let them ring. Sometimes I would sit with the phone in my hand, the vibration buzzing like a plea. and I would watch the name flash on the screen until it went dark. Each time I did not answer, a part of me trembled, and a part of me grew. That trembling was the old me, afraid of being unloved. That growing was the new me, learning that love built on demands is not love at all. They came to the door. I did not open it. I watched from the window as shadows moved across the porch, as fists knocked, as voices called my name. I sat very still and told myself the truth. Opening the door would not bring my son back to me. It would only bring more requests, more lies, more papers shoved into my hands to sign away what was mine. I stayed quiet. Silence was my shield. It was not long before their desperation changed shape. They stopped asking and started threatening. They said I would be alone forever. They said no one would take care of me. They said I was confused, that people were talking about me, that everyone thought I was unstable. They said I would regret this. And for a moment, in the middle of the night when the house creaked and my heart felt heavy, I almost believed them. I almost picked up the phone to beg forgiveness, to go back to the old rhythm of giving. But then I looked at the dress in the closet, still hanging unworn, and I remembered the photograph that proved my absence. If I was not good enough to be there on his wedding day, then why should I spend the rest of my life proving I was good enough to pay his bills? The day I said no was not a single day, it was a series of days stacked together, each one asking me to stand a little taller, to resist a little harder. The first no was on the phone, quiet and shocking. The next no was at the bank, steady and final. The next no was at my own door, refusing to let them cross my threshold. And each no was a brick laid in the foundation of a new house, not of wood or stone, but of resolve. It is strange how quickly clarity can make the familiar look foreign. The sofa where my son once napped after school now looked like the place he sat while avoiding my eyes. The table where we had shared meals now looked like the table where a stranger spread my private papers. Even the walls felt changed, holding the memory of voices that told me I was not special. I walked through those rooms and felt grief. Yes, but also something else. I felt freedom. Freedom does not always come as a loud announcement. Sometimes it comes as a quiet step across a room you once thought belonged to everyone else but now belongs only to you. That was the day I began to imagine a life beyond them. I did not know yet what it would look like. I did not know if it would be lonely or full, painful or joyful. I only knew that it would be mine. And after years of giving away pieces of myself, the thought of belonging to myself again was enough to carry me forward. The quiet did not last long. Quiet never does when people believe they own the rhythm of your life. After the phone calls went unanswered, after the knocks on the door met only silence, they changed their strategy. Desperation has many disguises, and theirs came dressed in concern. It was a Sunday afternoon when I turned the corner of my street and saw 3 cars parked outside my home. 2 of them I recognized instantly. The third had the look of something rented for a purpose. My heart thudded hard in my chest, not from fear, but from the realization that the battle I had been dreading had arrived. I told myself to walk with my back straight. This was my house. My key turned in the lock. My feet crossed the threshold. I had a right to be there. But the scene that met me inside was not a homecoming. My son sat on the sofa, his shoulders hunched, his face in his hands. His wife paced the length of the living room, sharp and restless. At my dining table, the one where I paid bills and wrote letters, a stranger in a grey suit had spread my life out like a deck of cards. Bank statements, insurance forms, receipts I had folded and kept in a dish for safekeeping. Papers that belonged in drawers and folders now lay under the hands of a man I had never met. I froze, then steadied myself. "What is happening here?" I asked. My voice was firm, stronger than I felt. Monica rushed toward me with a performance of relief. She named the man, said he was a lawyer, said he was here to help. She said they were worried about me, that I had been acting confused, that they just wanted to ease my burden. She spoke the word worried, as if it were a balm, but I heard the scrape underneath. I heard the hunger. The man stood, extended his hand, introduced himself as Mr. Fisher. His smile was practiced, the kind of smile that has been sharpened by years of slipping papers under pens. He said words that sounded harmless, temporary, protective, supportive. He slid a folder across the table. I did not need to read the title. I saw it at a glance, Power of Attorney. He said, "All you need to do is sign and your son and his wife can take care of things for you. You won't have to worry." I laughed, not loudly, but enough to make them all shift in their seats. "Worry has been my shadow for years," I said. "Signing this will not take it away. It will only make it permanent." I picked up the folder and walked to the trash can. I dropped it in, the thud of paper against plastic echoing through the room like a gavel. I turned back to them. "Leave," I said. My son looked up at me, his face twisted with something I had never seen on him before. Anger, yes, but also disbelief. He said, "Mum, you're acting different. This isn't like you." Different meant I had stopped paying. Not like you meant I had finally chosen myself. He tried again, his voice softening. "We're worried about you. People are talking. They think you're being manipulated. We just want to make sure you're safe." "Safe," I repeated, my throat tightening. "Safe is not handing over your life on paper. Safe is knowing where your money goes. Safe is locking your own door." Monica stepped forward, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. She reached for my hand. "You're like a mother to me," she said. "We love you. Please don't do this. We have obligations. We have bills. We counted on you." Her words once would have undone me. They once would have made me dig into my purse, reach for my checkbook, do anything to stop the pleading. But that day, her words sounded hollow. I pulled my hand back. Love that depends on money is not love. The lawyer cleared his throat, still calm, still smooth. He said, "This doesn't have to be difficult. We can make this easy. Just sign and everything will be managed." I looked at him long enough for him to feel my refusal. "Leave," I repeated. My son's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "You'll regret this," he said. "You'll be alone. No one will be there for you when you need them." I stood taller than I thought possible and met his gaze. "I already am alone," I said. "The difference is that now it is by choice." They left with stiff backs and wounded pride, their footsteps sharp against the porch. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against the wood, and felt my body shake, not with fear, but with the weight of what had just happened. They had tried to take my life on paper, to make my signature their weapon, and I had refused. That night I could not sleep, but I did not cry either. I sat at the table where the lawyer had spread my papers and looked at the empty surface. I thought of how fragile control can be, how easily it can slip from your hands if you are not careful. I thought of how many women must have signed that paper out of fear, out of guilt, out of exhaustion. I thought of how close I came to being one of them. In the quiet of my kitchen, I promised myself, never again. The morning after they left my house with their threats trailing behind them, I sat in the chair by the window and let the sunlight pour across my lap. I had not realized how heavy my body had become until I lowered myself into that chair and felt both weighted and light, as though I had been walking for miles with a stone in my pocket and finally set it down. My chest ached from the strain of holding myself together the night before, but there was also something new inside me. Something like pride. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that once made me feel abandoned, the kind that used to remind me of every time I waited by the phone for a call that never came. But that morning, the quiet felt like protection. I traced my fingers along the arm of the chair, the fabric worn soft by years of use, and whispered to myself, "You stood your ground." I said it aloud so I could hear it in the air, not just in my head. It was the first time in years I had spoken to myself with pride instead of shame, yet pride alone would not be enough to shield me. Their footsteps had barely faded from my porch when fear began crawling up my spine. What if they came back angrier? What if they forced their way in? What if they found another lawyer with sharper teeth? Or what if the law itself believed their lies over my truth? What if one paper signed by a judge could undo everything I had gathered of myself? The thought made me grip the arms of the chair until my knuckles whitened. I could not live like that, waiting for the next knock, waiting for the next insult disguised as concern, waiting for the next paper slid across my table. I needed something bigger than my voice. I needed someone who knew how to fight battles written in ink and sealed with signatures. That morning, with trembling hands, I picked up the phone and called a lawyer of my own. His name was Mr. Harris. When he answered, his voice was calm in the way rivers are calm just before they widen into lakes. I remember the steadiness of it, how it felt like a hand placed on my shoulder, telling me not to run, not to hide, but to speak. He let me talk. He did not cut in, did not hurry me along, did not sigh as though my story was too much. I told him everything. The wedding I was not invited to, the $33,400 drained from my savings, the confrontation in my home, the folder I dropped into the trash. My words poured out of me like water from a dam that had been cracking for years. At one point my throat caught and I thought I would not be able to continue, but then he made a soft sound, not a word, just a hum of presence, and it was enough to remind me I was not speaking into emptiness. When I finished, he said words that reshaped the air around me. This is elder financial abuse. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. You are not alone. The phrase landed on me with a sting and a salve all at once. Abuse. The word was sharp, final. I had avoided it because it sounded like an accusation, because it forced me to see my son not as a struggling young man, but as someone who had used me. I had told myself I was helping, I was giving, I was being a good mother. Naming it abuse felt like betraying him, but in truth it was the betrayal I had suffered that made the word fit. Abuse wears many faces, and one of them smiles sweetly while asking for your debit card. Mr. Harris did not soften his advice. He gave it plainly, step by step, each one building a wall around me. Change the locks, install cameras, open a new bank account at a different branch where no one knows your habits, document everything, keep receipts, keep notes, keep dates, build a wall of evidence so high no lie can climb over it. His calm steadiness steadied me. By the time the sun set that day, the locksmith had handed me a new set of keys. The sound of the old locks clattering into his toolbox was like the closing of a chapter. Above my door, a small camera blinked a red light, a silent guardian. On my kitchen table, my folder had grown thicker with new papers, bank forms, notes written in my hand, photographs of receipts laid neatly in rows. Each page felt like a piece of myself reclaimed. That night I sat at the table and listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock. For years those sounds had been drowned out by voices demanding, criticizing, asking, taking. Now they sounded like music. I realized the house had changed its voice. It no longer carried the weight of their footsteps or the memory of their demands. It carried only mine. The quiet was not emptiness. It was space. And in that space, I could finally hear my own thoughts without interruption. The next evening, there was a knock at the door. My whole body tensed, my breath caught, until I heard the voice. It was not theirs. It was my neighbour, Mrs. Brooks, holding a mug of coffee in both hands. She said she had heard the raised voices the day before, sharp and angry, and she wanted to make sure I was all right. Her concern was simple, unadorned, without calculation. It made my chest ache. I invited her in, and for the first time I told my story to someone who was not a professional, not a stranger in a robe, not an adversary trying to bend me. I told it to someone who simply cared. The words came slower than they had with Mr. Harris, because telling them to a neighbour meant exposing my heart, not just my evidence. I told her about the wedding, about the number 33,400, about the sofa where my son sat silent while his wife cut me down. When I finished, she nodded slowly, her eyes shining with understanding, not pity. She told me her own story. Her daughter had drained her bank account until nothing was left but regret. She had finally cut her off, and the silence that followed was painful but healing. "The silence is a harsh teacher," she said softly, "but it teaches well. Sometimes children return when they learn the difference between love and allowance. Sometimes they don't, and you learn to live anyway." I wept into that coffee mug, not because of what I had lost, but because of what I had found. Someone who saw me without asking for anything in return. That night, for the first time in years, I slept through until morning. But my son and his wife were not done. People like that rarely stop when their grip loosens. They changed tactics again. This time, it did not come with a phone call or a knock. It came with a piece of paper stamped with authority. A petition filed in court, accusing me of being incompetent, accusing me of being confused, accusing me of being unfit to manage my own life. They wanted the law to hand them what I had already refused. When I held that paper in my hands, my knees buckled. For a moment, I thought, maybe they will win. Maybe the system will see me the way they describe me. Maybe I will lose everything. Fear curled in my stomach like smoke, seeping into every corner of me. I sank into my chair, the same one where sunlight had warmed me the day before, but this time the light did not comfort me. It felt pale, distant. Then I remembered Mr. Harris's voice, steady and sure. Document everything. Build the wall. I rose, went to the drawer, pulled out my folder, now thicker than it had ever been, and laid the petition beside it. Their lies looked flimsy next to my truth. Their words were smoke. My evidence was stone. That night I sharpened a pencil and wrote the number again on a blank sheet of paper. 33,400. I drew a box around it. Beneath it, I wrote every sacrifice that had no price tag. The nights of lost sleep, the meals I skipped so they could eat, the yeses I gave when my heart whispered no. Then I drew another box around the page, larger, bolder, as if I were finally drawing the boundaries I should have drawn years ago. I stared at the paper until the lines felt permanent, until the number no longer looked like proof of my foolishness but like evidence of my strength. In the days that followed, something changed in me. I walked taller, spoke clearer, breathed deeper. It was as if saying no had given me a new spine, one that would not bend to guilt. Each step felt like practice for the courtroom ahead. Each meal I cooked for myself was a reminder that I could sustain myself without apology. Each night I slept undisturbed was a rehearsal for the peace I intended to defend. I was not just surviving anymore. I was preparing. I was finding my voice, and I was ready to use it. The day of the hearing began before dawn for me. I rose while the world was still dark, the kind of dark that feels thick and endless. My house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the tick of the clock on the wall. I walked barefoot across the floor, every step sounding louder than usual, as if even my house knew what awaited me. I paused at the table where I had once counted every dollar I had given away, every bill I had transferred, every sacrifice I had made. My hand rested on the cool surface, remembering the hours I had sat there with my head in my hands, whispering numbers like prayers that never answered. This time I was not counting money. This time I was steadying myself for truth. I boiled water for tea instead of coffee because my body needed something gentler that morning. As the steam curled upward in soft ribbons, I stood still and whispered, "Today is not about survival. Today is about truth." I said it more than once until the words stuck, until they became an anchor. I dressed carefully, not in anything flashy, but in clothes that reminded me of who I was before all of this. A navy skirt, a cream blouse pressed smooth, clothes that spoke of dignity, of clarity. clothes that carried no stains of shame. As I fastened the small brooch Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary, I touched it and whispered, "Walk with me today." I could almost feel him beside me, steadying me the way he always had when I faltered. The courthouse loomed large when I arrived, its stone face cold, its doors heavy as if daring me to enter. Inside, the floors gleamed, polished to a shine that smelled faintly of chemicals. The ceilings were high, and the sound of footsteps echoed. People moved through the halls carrying stacks of paper, their voices low and serious, as if the weight of decisions made their press down on their shoulders. Mr. Harris met me in the lobby. He was calm, his briefcase in one hand, his other hand resting gently on my arm for just a second. "We've prepared well," he said quietly. "Remember, just speak your truth. That is more powerful than anything they bring." His confidence wrapped around me like a cloak. When the clerk called my name, I felt my heart lurch. I held my folder tight against my chest like armor and walked into the courtroom. My son was there, seated on the left side. His shoulders were squared, his jaw tight, his face hard in a way I did not recognize. Beside him, his wife wore black, her eyes sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they intend to eliminate. Between them sat their lawyer, Mr. Fisher. I remembered him from my dining table, remembered his smooth smile as he slid that folder toward me, remembered the calm with which he tried to steal my life. Seeing him there felt like déjà vu, but this time the room was larger and the stakes were higher. I sat on the opposite side, my folder pressed to me. The judge entered, and the room rose. The gavel tapped, and the air seemed to grow heavy with formality. My heart pounded, but my spine stayed straight. Their lawyer spoke first. His words were smooth, rehearsed. He spoke in a tone that tried to sound sympathetic, but I heard the blade behind it. He said I had been generous for years, but that my behavior had suddenly changed. He called me erratic. He called me confused. He said I had isolated myself, refused contact, refused help. He claimed it was not truly me speaking, but others manipulating me, neighbors, lawyers, outsiders with hidden agendas. He painted me as a fragile woman who had lost her way, someone incapable of making sound decisions. Then came their witnesses. A neighbor who disliked me said my installing a camera was paranoia. A pharmacist, tricked into signing, testified that I seemed confused when buying aspirin. A doctor I had never met submitted a statement that my refusal to see him was proof of decline. Each testimony felt like a small knife, cutting in places where I had already been wounded. My son and his wife nodded along, their faces arranged in masks of concern, as though they were saints trying to rescue a poor, misguided woman. But I sat still, my hands folded over my folder. I let their words wash over me, because I knew the truth was heavier than their lies. And then it was my turn. I stood, folder in hand, and walked to the stand. My knees did not shake. My heart pressed hard against my ribs, but my feet carried me steady. I looked at the judge, and I spoke slowly, carefully, not rushing, not hiding. I told him my story, not the stripped-down version, but the whole truth. I told him about the wedding I was never invited to, about the pale blue dress still hanging unworn in my closet, about the words only special people that sliced deeper than any insult I had ever heard. I told him about the phone calls that came not as conversations, but as invoices disguised as affection. I told him about the silence of my son, how he could sit in my house, on my sofa, and say nothing while I was erased. Then I opened my folder. One by one I laid out the evidence. Rent, $500 a month for 3 years, $18,000. Groceries, $200 a month, $7,200. Gifts, emergencies, loans, furniture, $33,400 in total. Each receipt, each record, each note was a stone in the wall I built in front of their lies. I showed him the evaluation from the doctor who had tested me for 2 hours, who found my memory intact, my reasoning sound, my cognition sharp. I handed him letters from neighbours and friends who had spoken with me, eaten meals with me, laughed with me, and knew I was clear, strong, capable. I showed him photographs of my home, tidy and orderly, bills stacked neatly, meals cooked with care. And then I looked at my son. For a moment, my voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. I spoke of the nights I had sat by his bed when fever made him shake, of the meals I had skipped so he could eat, of the times I carried him when his legs were too tired to walk. My throat ached with the ache of remembering. Then I turned back to the judge. I showed up for him every day of his life, I said, my voice steady now. And when the time came for him to show up for me, he chose not to. That is not confusion. That is betrayal. And betrayal does not make me unfit to manage my own life. The room went silent. My son stared at the table, his jaw tight, his wife's lips pressed thinner, fury in her eyes. The judge leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. He asked me questions. What day was it? Tuesday. Who was the president? I answered. What would I do if I found a stamped letter on the ground? I said I would put it in the mailbox because mail is meant to arrive. He nodded, making notes, his expression unreadable. Finally, he set down his pen. His words were slow, deliberate, and each one landed like a stone building a wall between me and their greed. You are in full possession of your faculties. Your financial decisions are yours to make. The petition is denied. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated through the room, sharp and final. It was the sound of chains shattering. I closed my folder and stood. The air around me felt lighter, as though a storm had passed. My chest, which had carried fear for months, opened wide, free. My son did not look at me. His wife's eyes burned with fury, but their power over me was broken. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. I lifted my face to the sky, and for the first time in years I felt free. Freedom does not arrive in a single moment. It unfolds slowly, like a flower uncurling after a long rainstorm. For me, the first petals of freedom began to open the moment the judge's gavel fell. I almost flinched at the sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. But that sound was not the end of me. It was the beginning. As I walked out of the courthouse into the late morning sunlight, I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out and inhaled deeply. Though the sky looked the same as it had when I entered that building earlier, everything felt transformed. The air tasted brighter, carrying a hint of autumn and possibility. My lungs drew in a deep, clean breath as if I had been underwater for years and finally broken the surface. I blinked up at the wide blue sky, free and astonished. For the first time in years, I knew that my life was mine again. The realization was so beautiful and strange that I stood on the courthouse steps, letting the sun warm my face and chase the last chill of fear from my skin. I decided to sell the house soon after. Those rooms no longer felt like home. The walls carried too many echoes of late-night sobs and strained silences. The hallway remembered too many footsteps that were not mine. I could almost see shadows of the past in every doorway. My daughter-in-law pacing my living room as she delivered the words that broke my heart, my son standing by silently, avoiding my gaze. In my own home, I had felt like a ghost, tiptoeing around others. I knew I would never find peace there again. So I let it go. When I began packing, I moved slowly and deliberately, treating each object as a final parting with the life I was leaving behind. I touched each item gently, deciding what to carry forward and what to leave behind. The pale blue dress stayed. It was the dress I had bought for my son's wedding, unworn, with the tags still dangling. I remembered the hopeful joy I felt when I first tried it on, imagining myself in the front row on his big day. That hope had been shattered, but I kept the dress anyway. Not because I would ever wear it, but because it was my reminder of pain endured, of love given freely, and of the awakening that followed. Folded beside it, I placed a pair of pearl earrings I'd meant to wear with that dress. They still caught the light, sparkling quietly with no one to notice. Something in their gentle shine reminded me that a part of me had kept shining, even through the darkest times. But the sofa, the refrigerator, and all the other heavy things that had absorbed my sorrow, I left those behind. I left the sofa where I had sat up alone until dawn, waiting for a phone call that never came. I left the refrigerator with its small dent in the door, a scar from the night I slammed it shut in anger and grief. I left the dining table worn by years of family dinners that had gradually grown cold and silent. Those things had become symbols of all the giving and longing that filled that house, and I had no desire to carry them with me. Some memories are too heavy to move, so I set them down and closed the door behind me for good. I found a small apartment with wide windows that welcomed the morning sun. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom in an old brick building on a quiet street. But it was mine alone, and that made it beautiful. On the first morning there, I stood by the window with a cup of coffee and watched golden light spill across the floor. I set a little green plant on the sill and promised myself that if it leaned toward the light, I would too. Each day, I watched its leaves stretch further toward the sun, and I felt myself growing a bit more toward the light as well. I started buying fresh flowers for my kitchen table: yellow daisies, pink carnations, red roses, small bursts of colour that made the emptiness feel alive. In that new kitchen, I cooked meals for one without apology or restraint. For years I had cooked to please others, saving the burnt toast for myself and giving away the best portions. Now I seasoned everything exactly as I liked. If I craved pasta loaded with garlic and chili, I made it and savoured every bite. I ate at my own pace, sometimes with soft music playing and sometimes in peaceful silence. There was no one else to please, no one interrupting my meal with demands or criticism. When I finished eating, I washed the dishes slowly and relished the simple luxury of a clean kitchen that would stay clean until I decided to cook again. I also learned to sip coffee in cafes by myself, something I had rarely dared to do before. At first, I felt self-conscious sliding into a booth alone or occupying a tiny table with just my latte and a book. I would stir my coffee and keep my eyes down, bracing for pity or prying questions. But with each outing, I grew more comfortable in my own company. I sat with my back straight and my chin up, watching the world go by outside the window. I realized no one was judging me. In fact, no one even noticed. I was just another patron, and being alone was not something to be ashamed of. I was alone, but I was not lonely. My heart no longer waited for someone to see me. I saw myself and I was enough. With a steadier heart, I finally enrolled in the watercolor class I had dreamed about for years. Each Thursday evening, I stepped into a bright art studio that smelled of paper and paint. I remember hovering near the door on the first day, afraid I didn't belong. But the instructor greeted me warmly, and I found a seat among a dozen other beginners, each of us with a blank page and our own quiet hopes. For our first warm-up, while others painted trees and flowers, I painted the number 33,400 in deep blue, the sum of what I had sacrificed. Then I brushed over it with washes of lavender and gold until it blurred into a gentle horizon line beneath a pale morning sky. I added tiny symbols along that horizon: a pale blue dress, a simple sofa, a refrigerator door with a dent, a checkbook with fluttering pages, pieces of the life I was leaving behind. And finally, I pulled a streak of bright yellow through the grey clouds, a beam of sunlight breaking over everything. My classmates painted tranquil scenes, but my page held a sunrise over the story of my heartbreak and release. The instructor paused behind me and whispered, "That's powerful." In that moment, I felt truly seen. I had turned my pain into art and left a piece of it on that paper. I walked home with paint on my fingers and a lighter heart. Week by week, I discovered parts of me that had been buried. I began to travel, small trips at first to places I'd always wondered about. I took a train to the coast and walked along a windswept winter beach. The waves crashed at my feet with a steady, soothing rhythm. I whispered my late husband's name into the salty air and told him I was finally living as he had wanted me to. I like to think he heard me somehow. I let a few tears fall, of gratitude and of release, and the ocean carried them away. On another trip, in a seaside town, I saw a beautiful burgundy coat with soft wool lining in a boutique window. It fit me perfectly. The old me would have said it was too expensive, that I didn't deserve something so fine. Not anymore. I bought it and wore it out of the store, wrapping myself in warmth. It felt like a long overdue embrace, and I felt no guilt at all for wanting that comfort. I allowed myself small luxuries on my travels. In Paris, I sat alone at a cafe and ordered a decadent chocolate dessert just for me. The first bite was so delicious I laughed out loud with joy. In quiet hotel rooms, I danced on the bed and watched silly movies until midnight, with no one to judge or disturb me. Each morning I woke up in a new place and for a moment didn't remember where I was. Then I would smile, remembering that I was free and on an adventure of my own making. I felt truly reborn. Yet there were still nights when I thought of my son. In the darkness, I would wonder if he ever looked at his wedding photos and noticed that his mother wasn't there. Perhaps there's a photo of him with his bride, surrounded by her family, and a quiet space where I should have been. Sometimes a memory of him as a little boy drifted into my mind and brought a sting of tears. I saw his small hand waving to me on the first day of school, his grin when I cheered for him at his little league games, the way he'd hug me tight when I came home from work. And I would ache with the question of how that sweet child grew into a man who could shut me out so cruelly. When those thoughts grew too heavy, I reminded myself of the truth that set me free. I had shown up for him every day while he grew up, giving all the love I had. What he chooses to do with that love now is up to him. When it was his turn to show up for me, he did not. That was his choice, and he will have to carry it. It is not my burden anymore. Mine is the freedom I fought for, the peace I finally feel in my own heart. I learned that freedom isn't loud at all. It isn't a grand parade or a fireworks display. Freedom is a quiet morning with an open calendar. It's waking up to a clean kitchen because nobody left a mess for you overnight. It's sitting in a sunlit corner with a book, knowing your time and space are your own. It's checking your bank account and seeing your money untouched, waiting to be used for your needs and dreams. It's hearing yourself say no and not having your voice tremble or your heart break for saying it. Freedom is the gentle, steady rhythm of a life lived on your own terms. It feels like peace. And so, to you who listens to me now, I say this. If you are carrying the weight of giving until nothing is left of you, you are allowed to set it down. You can stop. I know you might be afraid of what will happen if you choose yourself, afraid of who might be angry or disappointed. Take a good hard look at all you've given and what it's cost you. Add up all those sacrifices and let that truth sink in. Then draw a boundary and stand behind it. The first time you say no, your voice may shake. That's okay. The next time it will shake less. Choose yourself without apology or shame. I thought it was too late for me. I thought I was too old and too broken to start over, but I was wrong. As long as you are breathing, your story isn't over. Even if it feels late, especially if it feels late, give yourself permission to start a new chapter. It's never too late to find your own happiness. If my story has stayed with you until the very end, I ask you for 3 things. First, if these words resonated with you, please like this video. That simple action will help it reach another woman who might be silently drowning, someone who needs to know she isn't alone. Second, subscribe to this channel. Join us here whenever you need a reminder that you are strong, that you are seen, and that your life is yours. Third, share your story in the comments below. Tell me, what would you do if someone you love told you that you were not special enough to stand by them on the most important day of their life? I invite you to share your truth. Your words matter, and your story might be the light that guides someone else out of the dark. I promise I will read each one, because I know what it means to long to be heard. Remember this, even in the deepest heartbreak you can rise. I rose from the ashes of despair, and so can you. Like a flower after the rain, you will bloom again in the light.